Welcome to the Emergency Traffic Podcast. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Emergency Traffic Podcast. We're here again to discuss another line of duty death with the hope that we can all learn from these tragedies. Please give us a like or a follow, and please check us out on social media where we are on Twitter and Facebook. Okay guys, how's everybody today? Doug,
really good. Excited we have our first guest, which will be fun, and I'm excited for this.
Yeah, what Doug said. Yeah, super excited. Yeah.
Okay, so this is the first on the Emergency Traffic Podcast. We're into our 11th episode, and this is a big one. And we have a special guest star. We have Assistant Chief Gordon Routley of the City of Montreal. Chief. City of Montreal, who is a 54-year veteran of the fire service. I met Chief Routley, we can't remember for sure when, years ago in my career, probably as selling apparatus and a part-time volunteer firefighter, trying to suck up any knowledge that I could from anybody that would walk by and talk to me. Chief Routley was fire chief in Shreveport, Louisiana, and previously an assistant to the fire chief in Phoenix, which was, of course, who I call the godfather of the North American Fire Service, Chief Bernasini, who passed away a few years. Chief Routley is a fire protection engineer and a licensed professional engineer. He also served as a safety officer with the Prince George's County, Maryland Fire and EMS Department. He is currently an assistant chief, as I mentioned, in City of Montreal in Quebec, Canada. He's also a member of the International Association of Fire Chiefs, the National Fire Protection Association, and a fellow of the Institution of Fire Engineers and the Society of Fire Protection Engineers. I've always wondered about getting into that Institution of Fire Engineers thing, but I don't know how. Can help me. Let's see, what else? You're a graduate of the Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government, holds a Master in Public Administration degree from Arizona State University, and a Bachelor of Engineering from McGill. And he studied fire protection engineering at the University of Maryland. Wow. Does that cover most of it, Chief?
Oh, I think that more than covers it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. On top of all that, I'm a firefighter.
Yeah, absolutely. On top of that, a firefighter. And you might be senior to me, and you're still active, which is awesome.
Yeah, I haven't been to a fire in 48 hours.
Wow, I haven't been to a wire in quite a while. Today's episode, which sort of leads to the special guest that we have, is the Super Sofa fire in Charleston, South Carolina, that occurred in 2007. It's a big episode. It's probably going to be two parts. We're going to start off with a little bit of scripted historic background on the city and the building and stuff like that. And then we are going to break more. Chief Routley telling us about his experience coming in after that fire and working with the city of Charleston to, one, investigate the fire and the good, the bad, and the lessons identified, and also make recommendations to the city for the future. So we'll talk about all that stuff. So we're going to get going here. The Super Sofa fire incident, the analysis that we kind of went off as a script, was produced by the team of the Charleston Post-Incident Assessment and Enhancement Review Team, which was hired by the city, I believe, from our previous discussions a few minutes ago. They conducted a comprehensive analysis of the incident, examined a wide range of factors that could have contributed to the tragic loss of 9 members of the Charleston Fire Department. The ultimate objective was to identify the lessons that may be learned from this incident with the goal of reducing the risk of future occurrences of a similar nature, which is why this podcast is here, because we think that people need to know about it. As incidents get in the past, they get buried in all our busy lives and social media and everything else. People maybe tend to not remember them unless we bring them up. So that's why we have this podcast, just to hopefully remind people. The report is intended to provide valuable information to the much larger audience of firefighters, public officials, and other interested parties to help them understand that the factors that contributed to this tragedy that occurred in Charleston and the lessons that should be taken from it. And as we've been doing, as I mentioned, we're on our 11th podcast now, and we're starting to see, many repeating factors that we want to identify and talk about, and just as we go along. And I've even been using them now in my incident command classes as I remember these investigations we talked about. So the fire started out on the evening of June 18th, 2007. The fire department responded to a fire at the Sofa Superstore, a large
It's a tongue twister, eh?
Tongue twister, yeah.
I get it wrong every time.
a large retail furniture outlet in West Ashley district of the city. Within less than 40 minutes, the fire had claimed the lives of 9 firefighters and changed the lives of countless others. The Sofa Superstore fire is a monumental tragedy that will be remembered and discussed for many years. The building was located on what's called West Savannah Highway. It was a flagship outlet of a chain that operated 3 retail furniture stores in metropolitan Charleston area. It was a complex of interconnected structures that had been constructed in several phases. A showroom building facing Savannah Highway was actually an assembly of 3 separate structures. The front wall was a facade with a parapet that extended above the roofline, creating the appearance of one large building when viewed from the road. But the front wall, including the parapet, was approximately 23 feet tall, while the roof behind the parapet was only 12 to 14 above grade. The main showroom was constructed originally as a grocery store in the 50s or 60s. The original building was 125 feet in width and 130 feet deep. A rectangular extension on the southwest corner was also there. The front wall was a brick construction with large storefront windows, while the side and rear walls were constructed of concrete block. The original structure had a flat metal deck roof supported by lightweight steel bar joists spanning from east to west across the store. The side walls were, as I mentioned before, they were cinder block, and they had a suspended ceiling was installed under the roof below the trusses. After the property was converted to a furniture store, 2 pre-engineered metal buildings were added on to the original store structure to expand the showroom area, one on each side. Each of these additions was about 60 feet wide and 120 feet deep to match the 130 feet depth of the original building. The first one was constructed on the west, and a few years later, the one on the east. There was 6 large openings inside the concrete block walls, 3 on each side of the original building, provided connections between the showroom areas so that you had a feel of walking in one common area, one common building. The combined floor area was in excess of 31,000 square feet. In addition to the pre-engineered metal structure was erected at the rear of the property in '96 for a warehouse. It was 120 by 130 and 29 feet tall, so a very tall, large rack storage building, not unlike all the ones we've been seeing up in the news lately, but that's another story. An enclosed sheet metal corridor approximately 20 feet in length connected the warehouse to the rear of the original building. The concrete block sidewalls of the original structure were designated as firewalls, and there was roll-down fire doors in the 6 large 8x8 openings that interconnected the showrooms. There was a 7th roll-down fire door installed at the point where the corridor that led from the warehouse to the rear of the original building was placed. All these fire doors had fusible links release mechanisms. The division of the property into 4 separate structures allowed the additions to be constructed without automatic sprinklers. I remember going out to the county office nearby when they just opened it here in Lacombe County when I was a firefighter, and how proud they were that they were able to deliver or build it underneath the requirement for sprinklers. They made it a few feet less than what they needed and put a firewall in the middle. And I just remember like, oh yeah, always, wouldn't want to put those sprinklers in there and save your multi-million-dollar building when a tractor catches fire. Anyway, there was fill-in additions just in the background here for everybody. The spaces between the warehouse and the showroom buildings were filled in gradually by the addition of 4 smaller structures. My dog is going to bark. FedEx is pulling up. We'll see.
Always good timing there, Paul.
If she
Always
barks,
good
we'll
timing.
stop. The City of Charleston files do not contain any records of building permits or permit applications for the 4 additional structures. Interior alterations were also conducted at the rear of the original building, presumably without permits. In summary, this is my comment on your report, Chief Routley. In summary, as the late Chief Bernardini would have said, this building was built to burn. Anyway, the closest hydrants, this is another good thing, the Sofa Superstore property were in the residential area on Pebble Road behind the building. There was no access from this side of the property to the showroom buildings or the loading dock. There were no hydrants on this section of the highway directly in front of the showroom. Hydrants were located on the east and west ends of Savannah Highway and on the side streets north of Savannah Highway. The closest hydrant to the front entrance was approximately 500 feet northwest. The closest hydrant from the east was on the north side of the highway, approximately 1,500 feet from the main entrance of the building. A hydrant that was previously located on the side of Wapoo Road, north of Savannah Highway, had been removed before the fire occurred. Flow test records indicated that most of the hydrants in the area could deliver 1,200 to 1,400 gallons per minute with a 20 psi residual pressure when tested individually. There was no test records to estimate total flow with multiple hydrants flowing. The City of Charleston Fire Department. The City of Charleston occupies an area of about 110 square miles with a total estimated population of 121,000 people. I assume this is at the time. The city includes the original Old City area and as it expanded into other areas. In 2007, the Charleston Fire Department included 19 fire companies operating out of 14 fire stations. The department employed 246 sworn members and 14 civilians with an operating budget of $14.9 million. Fire crews worked 24 hours on, 48 hours off schedule, staffing 16 engine companies and 3 ladder companies. A minimum of 4 members were assigned to each company on each shift, although most companies operated with 3 crew members on duty most of the time. Well, we've seen that before. Staffing was short on this particular shift. If staffing was short on a particular shift, ladder companies could be operated with a minimum of 2 to bump up the engine. On occasion, a ladder company would be removed for service due to staffing shortages. An assistant chief was assigned to command each shift. He responded to alarms in their first due district. The city was divided into 4 battalions with a battalion chief on duty in each district at all times. Standard response to a reported structure fire, so your general alarm, if you will, was 2 engine companies, 1 ladder company, and a battalion chief. A 3rd engine company would be automatically respond to the scene of any declared working fire. It was also that any high-rise buildings would be a 3rd engine was dispatched to as well. At the time of the Super Sofa fire, Charleston Fire Department did not use greater alarms to bring additional resources to scenes of an incident. The chief officer in command would specifically request additional companies through the dispatcher. So no 1st, 2nd, 3rd alarm, predetermined run cards, all that kind of good stuff that I like so much. And we had our last tailboard talk, or 2 tailboard talks ago on mutual aid, the Sofa Superstore fire. The Charleston Fire Department did not routinely utilize mutual aid resources for response to emergencies. Charleston and St. Andrews firefighters generally worked cooperatively when they responded together. However, their apparatus, equipment, and standard operating procedures were not compatible, and in most cases, companies from each agency would operate under their own command structure with loose coordination between the departments. We've been there, Doug. Operational effectiveness of mutual aid operations tended to depend on particular individuals who were on duty and responded to the scene. Most of the fire departments that serve adjacent areas to the city of Charleston operate their own individual dispatch centers. Oh, wow. Where have I read that before, where there's like 5 or 4 dispatch centers within 60 miles on fire departments? So they had their own, the systems were compatible, but they had their own dispatchers. What do you guys think of that so far? Doug, you'd comment in here?
Well, yeah, I mean, like you said, we talked about this on the tailboard talk thing, and I think this is like the perfect example of where your auto aid thing should happen, where all the fire departments are very close together. They're all kind of the same, covering the same area. They can't handle a big fire on their own and they need help. It should just be as easy as asking for an additional alarm. should be predetermined who comes, what they bring, and all that stuff. This is the perfect example where that would work.
And,
Yep.
if I can just add, it works that way now. They have a complete automatic aid response system where boundaries between jurisdictions have no impact on fire response. Everybody in the metropolitan Charleston area responds together, communicates together, trains together, does everything together as a result of this fire.
And that's good. It's just too bad it took 9 guys dying to make it happen.
Exactly. There are a lot of good things came of a very tragic event, and I'll talk about it a little bit later on. But
Yeah,
there were a lot of people at the time were saying we knew something bad was going to happen.
yeah. It's just how do we get areas to, Doug and I and Doug and I especially have had big discussions about these tactics, and how do we get municipalities to do that, especially when the level of service may not be the same, the training or the staffing or stuff. And so you're always figuring you're supporting somebody else, instead of supporting the people who paid for it. And I know you may have been involved in the Sun Valley. I know they have an extensive auto aid system down there too, where I remember demonstrating a fire truck in Glendale, Arizona. And I asked the chief, well, like, why are your trucks yellow? Everybody else in the valley is red, so traditional and stuff. And his trucks are chrome yellow. I was demonstrating a Bronto there, I think, at the time. Anyway, he said, well, it's easy. Just look at the news every night. He says, you see all the fire trucks and the big fires and stuff like that. And you always can tell when the Glendale ones are helping our neighbors. He says, so we're doing our good thing. And I'm going like, wow, never thought of that. You're right. So, and it was just because they have an extensive mutual aid. It doesn't matter, as our friend Mr. Brunacini said, which maybe Chief Routley even penned, Mrs. Smith doesn't care whose name's on the door as long as she gets the fire truck. So, okay, well, back to the script just for a second here, and then we'll pass it off to Chief Routley to tell the story. So the units began responding. The units that were responding from 1909 hours that night to 1940, so that first 40-50 minutes, was Charleston had Battalion 4, Car 2, Car 1, which was a chief, and Battalion 5 later on. He heard it on his in his radio and responded or heard about it. Charleston Fire had Engine 10, Engine 11, Ladder 5. Those were the first 3 units that were dispatched, and then they added for the working fire Engine 16, and each of those units had 3 people on them. And then Engine 19, 12, and 15 came in later, and then mutual aid sent a chief car and an engine and an engine and a rescue later on in that first 40 minutes to help. And I think that was St. Andrew's Fire that came to help. The fire started around 1900 hours, 7 p.m. The store was open for business at the time, although there was no customers present. There was 5 employees working in the showroom and 1 in the workshop in the rear when the fire was discovered. Temperature was 79 Fahrenheit, 26 Celsius, 82% relative humidity. Winds were not, wasn't typically a wind-affected fire. Winds were 9 to 11 miles per hour from the south-southwest. The fire was reported by a passerby who observed smoke and flames at the rear of the Sofa Superstore near the loading dock. The passerby called 911 on his cell phone to summon the fire department and went into the store to alert employees that their building was on fire. After expending the contents of a fire extinguisher, an employee went in and tried to put it outside, went into the showroom, got another extinguisher. When the employee returned with the second extinguisher, he was unable to re-enter the loading dock area because of the heavy smoke that had developed inside the loading dock. Remember, this started outside and in the holding room. He estimated the smoke had completely filled the area in less than a minute. While he operated the second extinguisher just from the doorway, he heard one of the fire doors rolling down into position. Upon analysis, the team found the only fire door that he could have heard in this area was the one between the warehouse and the corridor to the showroom. Fusible link was inside the holding room, so that's where it was hot. This suggests that the fire was quite hot already, had extended into the loading dock, sufficient heat to close that fusible link roller door to automatically close the mechanism. Okay, next is getting into the initial response. I don't know if Chief, if you wanted to just sort of chat it up, not really follow the script, but tell us the story.
Yeah.
I did put different highlighted colors in here so you can remember which unit's which if you need to.
Yeah, well, I'll just tell the story as it unfolded. Again, for a visual, the loading dock area was basically a wood frame, tin covered loading dock, which was attached on the delta side of the building, about halfway back, where the big warehouse connected to the main store. So the fire started loading dock. The loading dock was loaded with furniture that was scheduled to be delivered the next day. So the outside fire penetrated the tin walls and got into the loading dock. So they had a pretty good going fire inside the loading dock, which connected directly to the back of the store. The first alarm response is Engine 11, Engine 10, Ladder 5, and Battalion 4. Battalion 4 and Engine 11 are about a mile down the road from this place. They get the call. They said when they pulled out of the station, there was a column of smoke right up in the sky. So they knew they had a working fire. As they're approaching, the chief went toward the front of the building. The initial dispatch said that the fire was at the rear and that it looked like the smoke was toward the rear. So Engine 11 made a left turn at the corner before the fire to go around to the back. Well, as it turned out, that put them on the residential street behind the building, to which there was no access to the fire. So they had to go, continue on and go around a long block to get to the back around to the front of the building. That gave Engine 10 a jump on it. They happened to be out doing their grocery shopping, so they were halfway to the fire when they got the call. So Engine 10 actually beat Engine 11 to the front of the building. And again, the fire is about halfway down the delta side. Charleston's way of attacking a fire like that was Engine 10 backed down the driveway on the delta side of the building into position, and the expectation was that the second engine, which was now Engine 11, would take care of getting them a water supply. So 10 is backing down the driveway on the delta side. They get close to the fire. It's a 3-person company. The first thing they do is they pull a booster reel. The officer pulls a booster reel and starts attacking the fire on the outside. Firefighter pulls an 1.5-inch pre-connect, and their pre-connected lines were 250 feet of 1.5-inch with a 60 GPM nozzle on the end of it. So when he had the pre-connect ready to go, the captain put down the booster line. They had knocked down most of the fire on the outside at that point, so they went up a ramp that led to the loading dock. They started to open the loading dock door, and they said when they opened the door, there was no doubt that the loading dock was on fire. But they were a fight hard fire department, and they charged on in with their 1.5-inch, trying to take on this fully involved loading dock fire with a 60 GPM line. Meanwhile, Engine 11 has pulled up in front of the building. Ladder 5 is just coming down the street.
Chief, those were adjustable nozzles, right? They were like the turbojet or...
No, they were fixed gallonage.
Oh, I thought I read that they could increase them if they wanted to. They could change the gallonage or something.
Oh, wait a minute. Now that's a detail.
It's
No, I'm
only
pretty sure.
how many years ago? Sorry, Chief.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they were fixed gallonage.
Okay.
At least they didn't. At least they didn't change them because
Right.
their attack plan was 60 GPM.
Right.
So engine 11 stops in front. The district chief calls on the radio. He says, "Send me engine 12 to get a supply line for engine 10." So engine 12 is still in quarters. You know, they would be the next coming. So they've been called to get the supply line. The assistant chief arrives next. The assistant chief happened to be having supper at station 11, so he jumped on the call right away, and he arrived before, actually about the same time engine 11 got back around to the front of the building. At this point, there's absolutely nothing showing at the front of the building. So the assistant chief calls to the acting captain of engine 11 and says, "Let's go inside the store and see what's going on." They went into the showroom. The employees were still standing around the front of the showroom. There's no trace of smoke or anything inside the showroom. And they walked back toward the loading dock. Well, this place is full of furniture, and it's a pretty good walk headed back there. So they get back to the loading dock door. It's a double door that leads to the loading dock. And they said when they got there, there's just a little bit of smoke coming out at the top of the door. So the assistant chief started to open the door, and he said he unlatched it, and the draft pulled the door open because it was pulling air from the store into the loading dock. And when the door opened, he said, "We got a big fire here in the loading dock." So he calls outside and says, "I need a line into the store." Well, at that point, ladder 5 is just pulling up. Engine 11 is sitting in front. So together they say, "Okay, we're going to take the line inside." So engine 11 pulls up with the rear end of the engine near the front door of the store. The crew of ladder 5 gets off their rig, and they start pulling 1.5 inches. They start pulling an 1.5 inch pre-connect off of engine 11, and they start feeding hose into the store. Well, by the time they get that hose all the way back to the store, they've used up the whole 250-foot pre-connect, and they're just short of the door leading to the loading dock. So they call back, for more hose. So the acting captain of engine 11, to extend the line, takes the nozzle off the other pre-connect and makes it a 500-foot 1.5 inch pre-connect. Well, now there's plenty of hose to get back there. The line is actually being handled by the crew from ladder 5.
Right. Yeah.
They're in position. They're ready to go now, and they call to charge the line, and they call charge the line, and they call charge the line again, and they call charge the line again, and they don't get water. So the acting captain from engine 11 goes back outside, and he finds out he had an acting engineer who was his first or second shift driving. And this was a new pumper with an electronic transmission, and he was having trouble getting the pump engaged.
Oh yeah, we had a lot of trouble with those when the first electronic transmissions came out, especially.
Yeah,
they would possibly, you had to put it in reverse sometimes to get it to go into pump or out of pump.
So he came out, since it was his truck. He was normally the driver and connected, and he got water, but there was a delay of 5 to 7 minutes from the time that line went in until there was water flowing. So at that point, you've got the loading dock is on fire, and there's an 1.5 inch attack line coming from each end toward into it. Which, if you look at the diagram, it's an opposing hose stream situation. But if you look at the thermodynamics of it, you have two lines that are each flowing 60 GPM, and the amount of fire that was back there, those two lines couldn't possibly put a dent in the fire that was burning in the loading dock at that point. So a couple of other things are happening right along at the same time. The assistant chief starts calling for additional units, and they would call additional units one at a time. Called for engine 16, engine, let's see, had 12, 16,
19 and 15. 15 came
19,
later.
16 and 19 came from the same station. So one at a time, he says, send me this unit, send me this unit, send me this unit. And he calls for 16. And as they're pulling out of the station, heading for the fire, they say, what do you want us to do, Chief? And he says, I want you to come to the front of the building and pull a 2.5. Well, that's that's an indication that they've got a pretty significant fire. It had a secondary effect that happened to be the day of the firefighters golf tournament. And at 7 o'clock at night, most of the players at the firefighters golf tournament were at the 19th hole.
Oh,
And
we all know what that means.
yeah,
Getting refreshments.
yeah, I don't think they'd had many yet, but they were there. And a couple of them had radios. And the reaction was when the chief called for a 2.5 into the building, that was the signal that this is the big fire, because nobody in Charleston ever took a 2.5 into a building. So everybody who was able dismissed from the golf course and started heading for the fire, because part of their tradition was when there's a big fire, you all come on down and we all get to fight the fire. So now you've got, all of these off-duty Charleston guys headed for the fire, as well as the extra units that are coming.
There goes your accountability.
Yeah. Oh yeah, accountability. There's no accountability whatsoever, which had repercussions later on. So engine 16 arrives in front of the building. They get off the rig, they go to engine 11, and they start pulling 2.5 going into the building to as they were requested. So they're pulling 2.5 and they're following the 1.5 inch that's on the floor. The driver of engine 16 has to stop and get dressed to go in. And he realizes that they're pulling hose off of engine 11, which is already pumping 1.5 inches into the building, but they don't have a supply line. Neither does engine 10 at that point, but engine 12 was just arriving, and 12 has the mission of getting supply line for engine 10. So he says, do you want me to take care of getting a supply line for engine 11? And his captain says, yeah, take care of the supply line for 11. So he makes a couple of pullbacks. Another thing you have to remember is the hose load in Charleston on the rear end was a single bed of 2.5 and 2.5 inch pre-connects. They didn't have anything bigger than 2.5 inch hose, and just a single bed of 2.5.
So you couldn't do a double lay or anything?
No, it was a single lay and 2.5 inch hose.
So that's the supply line, Chief Sergeant.
Yeah,
That's their main supply line is a 2.5.
Yeah.
A single 2.5.
Yeah. And the firefighter who was the driver of 16 was an outstanding guy. So he makes pullbacks, hands the hose to the driver of 11, says, I'm taking care of your supply line. And he heads east on Savannah Highway. He knew his district really well, And he knew that when he got to the corner of Wapu Road, which was about 300 feet, if he just went to the left, there was a hydrant there and he'd be fine. What he didn't know was that hydrant was gone because it was at the entrance to a trucking company. The trucks kept knocking it over, and the water department got tired of putting it back up, so they had just capped it.
Nice.
So that hydrant's not there anymore. He looks to the right to see if there's a hydrant, and actually got out of the truck and looked down the street to the right, and there's no hydrant to the right. And he said, okay, well, I know there's a hydrant down the street in front of the Toyota dealer, but it's a long way down the street. He said, but it's all I've got. So he starts down the street headed for what I call the Toyota dealer hydrant. And he's dropping 2.5, and he's thinking to himself, do I have enough hose to get to that hydrant? And he's also going counter traffic because there's 3 lanes of traffic coming in the other direction, which he has to fight to get over to the hydrant, which is on the left side of the street. He pulls up to the hydrant and runs out of hose about 50 feet short of the hydrant.
Of course, who's got 1,500 feet of 2.5 in a single bed? Like,
yeah,
the 1,000 maybe.
Well, I think it was 1,350 or 1,400 feet of hose that he dropped
right
at that point. So he pulled up, he hooked up with his soft sleeve, and he had 2 rolled lengths of 2.5 that he unrolled, coupled together, and fitted that line out. And finally, when he got it all connected together, he was able to supply water to engine 11. Now, figure he's using a 2.5 to supply engine 11. That's 1,400 feet down the street. And engine 11 is trying to supply an 1.75 an 1.5 and a booster line, and a 2.5 that's still waiting for water, because the chief told the engineer, said, don't charge the 2.5 until you get a supply line, because you'll run out of tank water. So the 2.5 is still dry.
Thank you for the vindication, though, Chief, because I'm one of these anal guys that always bugged our crews to carry 2 donut rolls of 65 or 2.5 and 2 donut rolls of 1.75 in the compartment. And the guys always used to give me heck about that and say, what do we need that for? We got a hose bed full of hose. I said, you never know when you're going to need to grab a little simple hose roll and flake it out. And so thank you. See, I was right after all.
Yeah. Who would have thought you would run out of hose 1 length short of the hydrant?
Now, speaking about running out of stuff, Chief, we're going to run out of time here in 5 minutes. So we're going to break in a little bit here to make part 2. So we're limited to a certain time on the recordings.
Okay,
I'll let you know.
Okay, well, I'll keep talking. I'll talk fast so we can get on. Meanwhile, what's going on is, let's see it. That engine 16's inside with the 2.5. And the next units that come in, the crew of engine 12 goes to the loading dock. Then 15 comes in, and the chief says the fire's in the back, and go on inside. So they go into the store to help where the fire is. 19 arrives, and the chief sends them in. And then 6 arrives, and the chief tells them to go on into where the fire is. So they arrived at intervals of about 2 minutes from one to the next. The description of conditions, talking to the guys who were inside, well, the last that the acting captain from 11 saw was the guys from 16 are at the loading dock door, and they've got the dry 2.5 waiting for water so they can advance. And he says, now it's starting to get smoky inside. And he says, well, they were talking, wondering where the water is. They decided that they needed to put their face pieces on and start using their breathing apparatus. He headed back out, and he said by the time he headed back out to see what the problem is with getting water, that he had to follow the hose on the floor through the store because it's getting that smoky. Well, the next guys are coming in. We've got the crew of 16s in, then 19 and 15 and 6. And as each crew coming in, it's getting tougher. So when the guys from 6 got there, they said when they looked in from the front door of the store, all they could see was their hose lines going into a wall of dark smoke, and they couldn't see anything. So they were essentially, keeping one foot on the hose to try to follow it back there. The engineer from engine 6 was the last one to go in. His firefighter and his captain went in ahead. He followed. He said when he got toward the back of the store, he said it was zero visibility. He said it was warm and then it was getting hot, and you could hear the fire crackling up overhead above this. And he said he bumped into a couple of guys. Somebody went and got a pike pole and they popped a ceiling tile, and the space up above the ceiling was rolling fire at that point. But still, at that point, the only line that has water inside the store is the 1 3/4 that the guys from Ladder 5 have.
Off the tank.
Yeah.
I just have a question here.
Yeah.
So Battalion 4 and the assistant chief are both on scene at this point. Has anyone declared they're actually in command, or is it just kind of a free for all?
Yes. Yeah. There's no structured command.
Okay.
The assistant chief is nominally in command, and he's in front of the building. Battalion 4 is up by the loading dock, and right about this time, the fire chief arrives. He responded on his own, and speaking to him, as he put it, when I'm on the scene, I'm in command. And if you want to know where command is located, look for where the most fire is, and that's where I'll be.
Okay.
Salty.
Yeah.
We've met these guys. Salty. Yeah, salty.
So we're now at a time, the call came in at about 1907. The first unit got on the scene about 1911. Everything we've described has got us to about 1926. And a whole bunch of things are happening simultaneously at this point. Engine 10 was inside the loading dock. They had their 1 3/4 inside the loading dock, and they're not winning back there. There's more fire than they can deal with, and they're just thinking we're going to need to back out of here. When the fire burned through their hose line, which sounds like a bad thing, but actually it was a stroke of good luck because the hose line ruptured between them and the door that they were headed for. And the water shot up and bounced off the roof like a sprinkler system and actually protected their path. So they managed to get outside. By that time, the crew of engine 12 was just getting there. They pulled the booster line that they'd had originally and took it to the door of the loading dock. They found another length of 1.5 inches and replaced the length that had ruptured. And they got both of those to the loading dock door. At that point, the fire chief who was back there said, "Don't try to go back in," which was kind of an understatement because I don't think there was any way they could have gone back in. The other thing that's happening back there at that time is the big warehouse building that was just beyond them. They see at that point that the fire has spread to that big warehouse building. And so now we don't have just the loading dock on fire, but the fire is spreading to the big warehouse building. At that point, a bunch of the off-duty guys are showing up. And those off-duty guys say, we'll get on this. And they start pulling hose, and they pulled 2.5-inch lines off of engine 10 to try to attack the fire in the warehouse. They couldn't get the door open, but they got those 2.5-inch lines flowing. So now you got to visualize engine 12's got a 2.5 supplying engine 10, and they're trying to supply 2.5s, an 1.5 inches, and a booster line to attack the fire. And
that math doesn't add up.
Yeah, well, the engine was making that noise that's kind of, that sucking noise. So that wasn't working real well.
Which some of the operators attributed to the cars potentially driving over hoses, but really they were cavitating.
Yeah. And meanwhile, I spoke to the operator who was at engine 12, and he said I was giving him 250 PSI. Problem.
It's pressure and flow.
Yeah.
Doug, you have an experience like that for a major fire near Red Deer there, where you were pumping into a 4-inch or a 100 millimeter, and you were giving them all you could on that old C8000 Ford, right?
Well, I was on the tower.
Oh, you were trying to get water.
Yeah, the engine was pumping to me, and I was supplying the master stream. It was a dead end hydrant, so not a lot of water coming in, and I was basically on zero residual. And then my captain said, "Well, charge this 2.5." I said, "No."
With what?
There's nothing to give you. And yeah, so
They had that old 1050 Imperial, so 1250 US Ford C8000 Superior, just wound right out with that 3208 cat and giving you all the water they could give you, bursting hose lines. And yeah, I missed that fire. For the biggest fire of my career, and I wasn't there. I was out camping. Anyway, back to South Carolina.
Okay. Now we're talking all of these things are happening at the same time, right? Within a window of about 60 seconds that was happening. We talked about the employees, that there were 5 or 6 employees in the store, and there was one in the back. There's one employee who worked in the warehouse who, when all of this was happening, was in one of the little workshops in the back. And his only way out of there was back through the store. But as we said, the store is now full of hot, dark smoke, and he's getting pretty stressed. He had a cell phone, and he called 911, and on a second try got through to 911 and got through to the fire dispatchers and said, I'm in the storeroom in the back of the Sofa Superstore, and it's hot and smoky back here. And they said something along the lines of, well, no kidding, the Sofa Superstore's on fire. And he expressed the desire that somebody would come and get him out of there. So the dispatchers call the fire chief and say, we have a report of somebody inside. The fire chief calls the assistant chief. The assistant chief is with the store manager in front, and they said, is there any possibility that this employee is still inside? And they looked, and his car was parked in the parking lot. And they said, well, yeah, how do you get there? And they said, well, if you go out of the building, you go down the Bravo side of the building to the Charlie side of the building, you can get back there. The assistant chief is all by himself at that point. So now we divert to another side story. I'm sorry it's so complicated with the side stories, but the St. Andrews Fire Department, the store is right on the borderline between Charleston and St. Andrews. The property door on either side is covered by St. Andrews. The store itself is covered by the Charleston Fire Department. The guys from St. Andrews who were on duty that night were at the Chinese restaurant about 1.5 miles down the street having dinner, celebrating something. One of them got a cell phone call saying, "Hey, are you guys at the fire?" And I said, "What fire?" And he said, "There's Charleston's got a fire down the street." So he went to the door of the Chinese restaurant, looked down the street and saw a big column of smoke and said, "Hey guys, I think we ought to go on down there." So the St. Andrews guys saw the column of smoke down the street, and knowing most of the properties down the street were theirs, started heading in that direction. And as they approached, they saw that the Charleston units were already on the scene. So the St. Andrews battalion chief went on foot and went down the Delta side of the building and met the Charleston chief and said, "Hi, we're here. Looks like you got a big fire on your hands. Can we give you a hand?" And the Charleston chief initially said, "No, thanks, we got it."
I know. I highlighted that in the script. I go and I've been to so many calls. Actually, my dad was a fire chief years ago in Quebec. Well, that's another matter. But anyway, and he had the same instance. They were already set up flowing water, and the other guy said, "No, this is our fire, and you guys leave all your stuff." And of course, they couldn't get water flowing. And how many times has this happened? It's crazy.
Yeah. And well, as the conversation went on, the St. Andrews chief said, "You seem to have a water supply problem back here. We've got 4-inch hose. Would you like us to lay a 4-inch supply line for you?" And the Charleston chief said, "No, thanks. We don't really need that."
Don't believe in that stuff.
And then he said, "I noticed that you got this big warehouse that's really starting to get going pretty well. And it's right on the borderline." So the Charleston chief at that point said to him, "Okay, you can have the warehouse." So he gave the warehouse to St. Andrews, whereupon St. Andrews called the rest of their units, as well as mutual aid, and they took over the firefighting for the warehouse, which was basically a lost cause because the warehouse was going to burn to the ground. While this conversation was taking place, his crews were getting dressed out at the street, and they picked up on the conversation that there was somebody missing, and went to the assistant chief who was in the front, and he said, "We got to go around and find this guy in the back." So the assistant chief from Charleston, another battalion chief who was just arriving, and guys went from the front of the building down the Bravo side to the Charlie side, where they had to go through a hole in a fence and squeeze along the back of the building till they got to the corner where the guy inside was banging on the wall with a hammer or something. The St. Andrews guys, I think they used an axe and opened the sheet metal wall. And as they described it, they took 2 swings at the wall and opened up a slice that was about 3 feet long and 6 inches wide, and a 250-pound guy came out.
Wow.
And
I'm getting out of here.
they said this guy was obviously the luckiest guy in Charleston that night. They got him out of there and walked him around. He had taken some smoke, but he was still walking. And they brought him around and handed him off to the East guys.
Yeah, there's a picture, I think, in your report, and maybe the NIOSH report or something, of that fellow and the firefighters walking him out.
Yeah, yeah. While all of that was happening, now we've got, the activity that's happening on the Delta side where the fire chief is. You got the assistant chief who had been at the front of the building, who had been involved in the rescue. Well, simultaneously to all of this is when on the radio traffic, in the recording of the radio traffic, which I must have listened to 100 times, and we had enhanced and all kinds of things, you could start hearing the guys inside calling for help. There's only one used the word Mayday. Mikey French, one of the firefighters from Ladder 5, used the word Mayday. But there are about a dozen transmissions that when you listen to them all carefully and put it together, it's obvious that the guys inside are in severe distress. The 2.5 doesn't have water yet and never did get water. The inch and a half line got abandoned, and everybody is in zero visibility, high heat. They're running out of air and getting pretty panicky. The engineer from Engine 6 is a fellow who goes by the name of Billy Bob Kilcoyne. He was the last one to go in. And I got to tell you, if I am ever in trouble inside a building, I want Billy Bob Kilcoyne to be my partner. Because he was back there. He's the one who popped the ceiling tile and saw that the fire was up above the ceiling. He said a few seconds after that happened, he's in zero visibility. And he said he got run into by a couple of guys who were obviously looking for a way out of there. He says he's not sure if it was 2 or 3, but they ran into him and almost knocked him over. And they were trying to follow the hose to get somewhere. Now, we think that those are the guys from, maybe you would have to know the names of the guys, but they were some of the guys from the attack that were looking for a way out of there and were lost and running out of air.
Chief, I always would tell my firefighters with minimal success that if you're in a commercial structure, one of the first things I want you to do is poke a ceiling tile out so you can see what's above your head, and maybe if you got a camera to check it out. I don't know what you think that would have helped them if they would have looked up there earlier.
It might have. It wasn't in their culture to do it, but I tell you what would have helped a lot more is somebody standing back 50 feet from the building would have seen the conditions going on. But I think in the report there are there are some pictures where you could see that that whole attic space or the void space above the ceiling all the way from the back to the front of the store is charged with dark smoke. And interesting observation, we asked everybody who survived, did you see that? The only person who saw it was, a photographer who took the pictures of it, and the operator of Engine 10, who said that he saw it, but it was so obvious that he didn't say anything because he believed that everybody could see it.
Yeah. So that whole, command from a location where you can observe and you can communicate and you can hear the radio and all that kind of stuff, right? No, I just wanted to know about that ceiling tile thing, because that's always something I think guys should do if they're into occupancy like that, and something people that listen to the podcast can maybe get out of it, hopefully.
Absolutely. Anywhere you particularly if you've got a suspended ceiling they had in there.
Yeah.
You got a suspended ceiling probably 10 to 12 feet above the floor, and then a 7 or so feet of void space above that. Some ceiling tiles and see what's going on up there, because that building is going to fill up with smoke from the top down. Well, it's going to have a whole lot of hot smoke, which is fuel, above the ceiling before it starts banking down below the ceiling. Well, at this point, it's not only filled everything above the ceiling, but it's coming down and it's down to the floor. So back to Billy Bob Kilcoyne. He gets run into and spun around. And then he says, okay, I got to look for the rest of my guys. He takes a few steps and he runs into a firefighter who is essentially panicky, who latches onto him and says, we got to get out of here. Billy Bob says, okay, I know the way out. I got the hose line here. If we follow the hose line, we can get out. So he escorts this firefighter out of the building, and gets to the front door and basically hands him over to the guys outside, and then turns around and goes back in looking for his crew. Well, this is just about the time that they start to have an awareness outside the building that things are going bad. None of that radio traffic from the guys inside was heard by anybody outside. It was recorded. People heard it on scanners. People in the other stations heard it on the station radios, but on the scene, nobody picked up on it. One person who did pick up on it was an off-duty battalion chief who was on his way to the scene from the golf tournament, who picked it up on his portable radio and tried to call the fire chief a couple of times to tell him, we got a Mayday situation going on inside the building. Couldn't get through. So finally drove as fast as he could to the scene and ran and found the fire chief and said, Chief, there's radio traffic coming from guys who are in trouble inside the building. At that point, the chief called the assistant chief and said, is everybody out of the building? The assistant chief said, well, one guy just came out. But he says it wasn't him that was calling for help on the radio. There must be somebody else. So that's when the chief came around to the front. And in the pictures that were taken at that point, you could see that there's no smoke coming. But if you look in the front doors, it's just like a dark gray blanket. One step inside the door, and you hit a wall of smoke. Let's go back to my friend Billy Bob. He's back inside. He follows the hose lines back to where he was, and he's still looking for his crewmates. His captain found the inch and a half nozzle lying on the floor, somewhere in the back. It had been abandoned, and he picked it up, and he said, at this point it's getting really hot, and we're really getting worried. So he said, I opened up the nozzle and it flowed for about 15 or 20 seconds, and then it ran out of water.
Oh shit.
So he said, now we've got no water, we've got a dead line, we've got all tangled up hose to try to figure out which way out. He said, we're just dealing with a tangle of hose. And he said he was just about at the point of saying to himself, I'm going to die in this place, when Billy Bob found them and said, come with me. And he brought them out. So he brought 3 guys out of there.
Wow. And is that engine 10 was out of water, I suppose, right? Because it's supposed to have the hydrant.
Yeah, engine 11 was
11. Out. Sorry, 11.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he came out, and there's actually video of him coming out with the other 2 guys from his crew. His captain, Mark Davis, said that he ran out of air about 20 steps from getting out of the building. And he said by the time he got out of the building, his face piece was sucked flat up against his face from trying to suck air through the rubber of his face piece.
Not much air coming into his pack.
No. And so, I mean, you can imagine the level of anxiety that's going on there. And at that point, nobody knows who else is inside. The people are starting to gather around the front as those guys are coming out, and there are a couple of pictures that are just amazing for their photographic value. And I have to try to describe them in words, but look at the front. You can see the stratification inside. There's a heat stratification line that's probably at about the 6-foot level above the floor, where you could see that everything above that line is so hot that the posters on the windows are turning black and blistering, and tar is running down the windows. So you've got this real hot level of gases occupying the top half or 2/3 of the store, and the bottom level is getting radiant heat from it, but it's not as hot. So now we have a classic question for everybody to think about. You're faced with that situation. You've got a big store that's full of hot smoke gases. You know it's hot, and you know or you think you have guys inside. What are you going to do?
Do I take the window or do I not?
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Do we take the windows or not? And I say we talked about this. We had Dan Madrykowski and the guys from National Institute of Standards and Technology, and we talked about it for hours. And he said, okay, what happens if we vent the roof? Well, if you vent the roof, you're going to let heat out the top. But as soon as the first wave of heat gets out, air is going to start rushing in to replace it, and it's going to light up.
Yeah.
If we take
unlimited fuel, right? I mean, it's full of gasoline.
Yeah. If we take out the windows, air is going to come in, and in 30 to 40 seconds, it's going to light up. I said, it's basically inevitable at that point that it's going to light up. And I said, the only possible action that we could come up with was, okay, take out one window and put about 1,000 GPM stream into that atmosphere.
Right.
And you just might be able to keep it from igniting. Maybe
right. Use that entrainment of air with water to reach in as far as you can. No, I like that. I always used to teach firefighters when I delivered platforms, if you get a car dealership or this kind of place, the best thing to do is just take that aerial and smash it through the front windows with the monitor flowing water, and it might save it.
Yeah, it's a just might. Well, it didn't. They took out a couple of windows hoping to ventilate it, and that strategically.
They had no water.
And they had no water, yeah.
They had no water. They were thinking they could vent enough. There were a couple of guys who went back in. Billy Bob and the battalion chief who had come from the golf course both went back in looking for guys and almost reached a couple of the guys. But it was lighting up real fast. And they got out, it's a miracle that those guys got out. They were burned, but they made it out alive.
There was no chief officer there to stop them to say, like Worcester, nobody more today.
No, and there wasn't time. It all happened. It all happened in a space of 3 or 4 minutes.
Yeah.
From the radio traffic started through everything I've described here is maybe a sequence of 5-6 minutes altogether until it lit up, and pretty much the whole inside of this store lit up within a period of 60 seconds. And then there was just nothing that could be done to save the guys who were inside. Now, we talked about accountability. They thought there was one guy inside, or possibly two. They had no idea that there were 9 guys still inside. The inside of the store lit up. About 15 minutes of fire, and the roof came down. There was nothing anybody could do at that point. They're throwing water at it, but it was just going through the motions of throwing water. And as it died down, they said, well, we're going to have to get in and start looking for the guy we think is missing. Who went in looking for them, but the guys from Engine 6 were the guys who got out. The last guys out were part of the crew that went back in looking. And they knew they were looking for one particular captain. And they found 2 bodies. And they weren't him. Well, then they started counting heads. And I said, oh, well, we might be missing another guy. Well, it took 3 hours before they figured out who they were missing, and they found 9 bodies.
That's kind of like that Shirley Towers in the UK. It was a podcast we did last month where they really didn't know who was missing, because in the department that does it, they rename their crews, Red 1, Red 2, Red 3, Red 4, and they weren't sure who came out and who was missing. And people were phoning. They knew people were missing, and then the families started talking. Firefighters were, texting or whatever, and they lost control of who was injured and who was missing and stuff. And this was cell phones weren't quite as prevalent then. Maybe people weren't doing that, but yeah, it's the same thing. They had no idea who was missing. Yeah,
like for instance, they never suspected that the crew of Ladder 5 was missing, because Ladder 5 had been moved by some off-duty guys who'd come in, had moved Ladder 5 over to the Delta side and put it in operation. And when somebody asked, they say, well, where are the guys from Ladder 5? They say, well, they're operating it. They're over there. And it was like an hour or so went by, and they said, no, these aren't the guys from Ladder 5. Nobody knows where they are.
Well, I remember I sat through a presentation by David Griffin about this fire, and he said one of the guys' wives showed up at the scene and said, oh, where's my husband? And they said, oh, he's down the street pumping on his truck. And
yeah.
He was not down the street pumping on his truck. He was one of the guys that died, but they had no idea who was in there or how many or from what truck. It was just, no accountability at all.
Yeah. And I think you guys can just imagine the psychological impact that was going on there.
Well, we talked to David Griffin, and a doctor, and it's traveling around North America to talk about this, especially the mental part of PTSD. Like it's unimaginable.
Yeah, I mean, David's story himself. David and I are great friends now. David was the operator of Engine 11. He was at the front door. This all happened. He was the guy who couldn't get water.
Right.
It had a devastating psychological impact on him. It took him years to get over it. Now his life's mission, he's in charge of safety for the Charleston Fire Department, and his mission is to tell the story.
So this is probably a good time to we've got to the main focus here and what happened in the timeline. Maybe we go into part 3, talking about the lessons identified that you pointed out in the report, and then I know you want to talk about the changes and the results of your report on the fire department and how that's changed things for the better. Does that sound like a good plan, everyone?
Yeah, sounds good. If the chief is okay with it.
Sure. And I think most of the lessons are pretty obvious to anybody who's been listening so far.
So why don't we touch on the lessons real quick, because like you say, we've talked about them. Why don't we wrap those kind of up?
Yeah.
And then part 3 will be how that's, the results of that in Charleston. We've got 15 minutes left in this one. Let's try.
Yeah. Do you want to read off the
Sure.
That, I think that's a good way to go.
Sure. Okay. So, the analysis of operations, basically, incident command, we've talked about that. The first arriving unit at the Sofa Superstore was Battalion 4. He performed a rapid visual size up of the situation on the west side, directed positioning of the first arriving engine company 10. He did not formally assume command and did not perform the listed functions of an incident commander. When the assistant chief arrived, less than 60 seconds behind him, battalion chief went on the west side of the building. According to fire department policy, the assistant chief then became incident commander upon their arrival on the scene by virtue of rank, but he did not formally assume command of the incident or established a fixed command post. He spoke briefly to Battalion 4 near the northwest corner, and then he went inside the building to do a personal reconnaissance. The assistant chief supervised tactical operations in the building and in front, and he entered the showroom 2 or 3 occasions to observe the situation. He abandoned this post when he became personally involved in the rescue of the civilian in the rear, which, life safety, number 1 priority, all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, no one was directing those operations. So the fire chief came in. He assumed incident command by virtue of rank as part of their policy. He did not formally assume command or a fixed command post. He met briefly with the assistant chief before taking personal responsibility for operations on the west side of the building. No chief took overall command of the entire incident scene. The fire chief operated at the tactical level, directly supervising the task level work. He became directly involved in the vicinity of the loading dock and the warehouse during this critical phase of the incident. This should not be the role of the incident commander. He was not in a position to view or manage the overall incident, as you've mentioned already, and you can see from the pictures what Engine 10 assumed, that someone is taking care of that. I'm doing my job, my pump's running, I'm pumping water, the building's burning. Fire chief and the assistant chief are operating independently, supervising operations in different areas. There was no effective coordination. There was no systematic size up of the situation, no 360, no one in a position to view the overall incident scene. There was no overall strategy for attacking the fire. Operations were conducted independently from 2 sides of the incident, which again, like you talked about briefly, Chief, was, the 2 hose lines were actually opposing each other, although in the environment they were operating in, it didn't really matter because they were both probably inadequate for the job that they were chosen at 60 gallons a minute. Otherwise, they were potentially, affecting each other. Talked about communications was not controlled. Again, I say the only tool the chief has, or the commander has, is the radio, and this was not controlled. The assistant chief, battalion chief were all issuing orders and providing direction independently using a single overloaded radio channel. Critical messages, including the distress messages that you mentioned from firefighters inside the structure, were not heard. That's sort of why, and I've had some debates with my partners on the podcast here. I like to sit the commander in a vehicle or in a command post where it's quiet, not outside. So, your number 1 job is those people that are in the building in that, IDLH atmosphere, and missing those messages is just not something that should happen, especially if other stations heard them. Simultaneous offensive attacks. The firefighters who were attacking the west side were close to an exit and were able to escape the increasing volume that forced them to retreat. The fire had burned through the hose line, which, was a dangerous situation, but at the same time, like you said, it created a water stream, which is awesome. Offensive strategy was probably appropriate.
I got one question there.
At the first day.
Paul.
Yeah.
Actually the question is towards the chief. When the crew of engine 10 pulled out of the loading dock. Did they communicate that over the radio to let the other guys know that, hey, we are pulling out because it's so hot on our end? Was that ever communicated?
No, it was never communicated on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
When they came out, the fire chief was there, and he saw what was going on, but there was no communication over the radio to tell anybody else that
which was standard practice in that department, in that the officers did not typically communicate objectives achieved or work assignments changing or status reports over the radio, right, Chief? That was a thing that was in your report as well. Is that they just didn't get used to talking, saying, "Hey, this is what's happening."
Yeah, they didn't, they didn't do incident command. They didn't do accountability. They didn't do strategy and tactics. Their approach to fighting fire, which was based on fighting fire in 2- and 3-story balloon frame residential, was get your ass inside there and fight hard and don't come out until the fire's out.
The Booster Boys.
Yeah. And we've seen that before, though, where you employ residential tactics to a commercial structure, right? I mean, it was the same at that, we just published the pool hall fire in Michigan. It was the same, in many other ones we've done where it's a commercial structure and we're employing residential tactic. No 360, no control of the flow path. You could even make that about the Houston 4 potentially, in that, they went in the front door like they always do and put lots of water on it and hope for the best. Unfortunately, they didn't know it had been burning for 3 hours already.
Yeah.
I think Charleston was a traditional East Coast hard charging fire department that when they got their single family dwelling fires, hit it hard and put the fire out and were badass about it. And then this is the one that didn't work and they didn't know what to do. They couldn't adapt their plan to change to this kind of fire in this building.
I wonder if there was other ones, but by luck, by chance, it worked, and they kept doing it. That's got to be the case. I mean, it can't be the first time that they had a commercial fire and all that kind of stuff. But it does talk in the recommendations, Chief, about the critical point. The strategy didn't change because there was no strategy. I agree. From offensive to defensive, we're losing it. Right away when they saw it inside the loading dock and were ineffective, that was a question. And then when they opened those doors to the loading dock and that yanked it out of their hand, and we're like, okay, this is bad. That's probably when it should have changed. The company's operating deep inside a building with only one identified exit. The interior of the building, of course, was extremely difficult to navigate. I can only imagine. The heavy smoke, visibility, we talked about it. Only one hose line, low flow. Large hose had been stretched in position, however, off with the truck, but there was no water supply, which of course was a big problem. And there's no visual evidence. There was visual evidence that was not observed by any fire officer of the fire had extended into the void space, which we've talked about. No rapid intervention team, of course. Everybody was assigned before they got to the fire on what their tasks were, which again led to the lack of the rapid intervention establishment. I'm familiar with the British Columbia thing. Before you put a second crew in, you've got to have a RIT crew, or 10 minutes in. It's OSHA in British Columbia for a RIT crew within 10 minutes, just in case. Which you would have need more than one RIT crew, wouldn't have? It might have helped, but what else? Overall strategy: committing firefighters to conduct interior fire attack. Objective of offensive attack is to control and extinguish a fire within the area that's already burning while preventing extension. Defensive strategy, this is just explanation that you had in the report. Access to the fire area was difficult, and the building configuration created immediate exposures on all 3 sides, which again command should have taken. It was the 2.5-inch pre-connected lines were advanced. We're talking 60 GPM, 220 liters per minute, which combined wouldn't do 2,000 square feet. Never mind 31,000 square feet. What else? Looks like you guys did some formula evaluation using the NFA formula. 733 gallons per minute would have been required to suppress the fire in the loading dock area, and they were trying with 60. What else? No ceiling opened. We talked about that. Situational awareness. We talked about that. Not aware of the complex building configuration. They didn't know which walls were firewalls. That whole pre-fire planning wasn't there. Although people had been in the store a lot because they bought furniture, but they, then the inspections department and the fire department didn't work together on this apparently, and the pre-fire plans were very inadequate and they weren't accessible. They didn't have them. The same as Shirley Towers. The department was transitioning from paper to electronic pre-fire plans, and they didn't have the electronic ones in the truck that they were in, or the captain wasn't trained on them or something, and so they didn't realize how the layout of the flats were. The single radio channel, Dirk, this is my favorite, the order model. They did not follow the order model. For you, that's where you repeat back your instructions on the radio, even though it takes more time. When you're assigned an assignment, you repeat back that assignment to make sure that you understood and you got it correctly.
That's called 10-4.
No, it's not 10-4. Chief Routley, you got to help me out here.
Yeah. 10-4.
Well,
I think you understood.
Yes, exactly.
There's a difference between saying 10-4, I'm assigned a fire attack, and repeating a whole paragraph that you just got told on the radio.
Yeah.
That's what we have our gripe about.
We do repeat the assignment. We just don't go into great detail of,
Just give me a couple of key words so I know that you were paying attention.
Exactly. And then as command, when you get a message from fire attack or search and rescue, and as a command, you copy all that. You don't repeat it. You just say, copy that.
Yeah.
And done. Because if you're in doubt, then you just get them to repeat it, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, I want to hear something like, copy, I'm going to the rear with a line. Or
there you go.
I'm going to the roof to ventilate, or,
repeating back the instructions.
a brief synopsis. A brief synopsis.
See, Doug and Dirk haven't taken our favorite command program yet. Although, Dirk, you took fire command. Basically, your department basically uses fire command. Are you supposed to repeat back?
I don't think we ever talk. Let's see, our fire commanders, ICS 100, 200. They don't talk about radio communication.
Oh, but I've looked at your department's command program, and it's basically Chief Bernasini's book.
The original, the original, like 20 years old, kind of. Yeah, exactly.
20.
Anyway,
40.
40.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, we use Revis, so we're kind of like in the 80s, right?
Yeah. The other thing is it was all on one radio channel. So another reason why you couldn't repeat back is because the radio channel was clogged. It went against NFPA and common procedures, which is dispatch the fire and then give it a tactical channel, and they work on that tactical channel so that dispatch can do everything else. So that wasn't done either. Let's see. Department's policy left all decisions to the incident commander to determine when tactical communication should be switched, which they didn't do because there was no commander. They didn't use their repeaters. I wanted to touch on the what was the other fact I wanted to touch on? Oh, high ambient noise, of course, absence of a fixed command post.
Something that stands out to me is it seems like every company that arrived was all assigned a fire attack.
They just whatever. They all mixed up. There was no.
But there was no like, opening up walls and doing truck work and search and rescue and ventilation and all the things that need to happen along with fire attack. It was just take a line, supply a line, take a line. Like ladder 5 had the line. Well, to me, the engine should have the line, and ladder 5 should be opening things up and stuff like that. That's
a couple other key things I want to point on before we end this episode. That's awesome. Is they didn't do truck work, which they weren't used to doing truck work. That's not how they operated. They typically stole guys from the trucks when they were short-staffed on the engines, which would have been all the time. So they probably only had 2 guys on most of the trucks most of the time. The SCBA low air thing. So it was general practice with a 22 16 cylinder that you didn't refill it unless it was below 1500. So, I mean, the work cycle was 5 minutes. So then, and we're seeing that. And that's why NFPA's changed the low air alarm now to be longer, because in Charleston and many other departments, and that's how I was trained, is when your low air alarm goes, you head out, which, it's not. You should never hear your low air alarm. If you were walking out of the building and your low air alarm is sounding, that's a mayday. You ran out of air. And so that was exemplified here by having even lower air. I don't know if the compressors weren't handy. Maybe they didn't have enough of them in the 14 stations or whatever. But that was terrible that they would run so low on air. No RIT to be sizing up. RIT's an extra safety officer, just like, and Doug, from the department you and I were on, I always counted on the engineer to be my extra officer if I was tied up doing something else. He's my safety guy. So the building, of course, was big. Crew accountability and integrity. So they were all mixed up. You got to keep your crews together. Nothing like getting them all mixed up and you don't know who's doing what and what they're doing to who, where they are. That is just, again, that's command. Water supply, of course, another big factor. The hydrant taken out because Public Works didn't want to replace it. What else? That's about it, I think.
The most important thing to me out of the investigation is for people to learn from it. That 9 guys lost their lives. The one thing that can come of it, of benefit, is that information gets shared. And I hope the lives of other firefighters will be saved because of the information. So that's always been my primary objective. And really a way of honoring those 9 guys. It became pretty obvious that there were a lot of things about the Charleston Fire Department that needed to be fixed. And a lot went into it. I mean, there were a lot of psychological problems. A lot of people left the department because of it. The department needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. And when the full assessment came out, the mayor was very much ready to make the investments and make the changes. And one of those was new leadership. So he asked me to help him find a new fire chief. And I said, well, I would help, look for somebody, or at least to define the criteria that they needed to be looking for. A couple of days after that, I got a phone call from a good friend of mine, Tommy Carr, who at that time was the chief in Montgomery County, Maryland. And Tommy and I had been friends for some time. And Tommy got me on the phone and he said, things are going really well here in Montgomery County. And they were. Tommy had done a marvelous job in Montgomery County. And he said, but, did you know I grew up in Charleston and I was planning to retire to Charleston? And I said, no. And he said, yeah, it was always my plan. I'm going to retire in a couple of years and move down to Charleston. And the wheels started turning in my head. And he said, but, things are going pretty well here. He said, if they'd be interested, I could leave Montgomery County and apply down there. And I said, Tommy, if you're interested, call the mayor right away. And he said, yeah, I'd be interested. So I called, I put the phone down and I called the mayor and I said, okay, call off the search. I've got your guy.
Wow.
I cannot think of anyone in the fire service in North America who could have done what Tommy Carr did over the next 3 or 4 years. He was the right guy in the right place at the right time. He had the vision and he had the skills to come in and help them help themselves. I mean, Tommy was a lovely guy, and he unfortunately, he came down with Parkinson's disease and died about 4 or 5 years later. He was there 4 or 5 years, but he was the guy who could do it. He brought John Tippett with him from Montgomery County as his operations deputy. They rebuilt that fire department, and I would say that it is a model today. I would send people there to see a fire department that's really got their act together. Not only Charleston, but the whole area. It's a whole regional system now. There's separate departments, common dispatch, common communications, common training. Everybody runs together without regard to boundary lines. It's a system. They do everything the right way. And one person above all is responsible for that, and that's Tommy Carr.
It's so good to hear that they are able to cooperate with their neighbor, and it's rubbing off with the region. And you know, you get all kinds of politics into regionalization and stuff like that, and you've lived through some of that in your past as well. But it doesn't matter whose name's on the door. It doesn't matter who they report to. It's the ability of those chiefs and all their staff to look at the end result, the customer, and making sure we provide the best service and the best training and the best equipment to everyone in the area. And that common dispatch and common training, it's so cool. That's good to hear. And we have a few other areas in North America that are doing it, but there's a bunch that aren't. And that's, how do we pass that on to them? I don't know, but
well, it just makes so much sense. The citizens don't care about the politics. When they call 911 because they have a problem, they want somebody to show up in a hurry that can take care of their problem.
Yeah.
Want to do that. And the more we can work together and focus on getting the job done, the more we can be proud of what we accomplish. It's sad that it takes a tragedy like this to make it happen, but it's also refreshing to see that it can happen. And it's just a great example. And there are a bunch of people down there that I consider good friends today that were part of it. The willingness of the city to jump on board and make it happen, to bring in an outside chief, to let him do the act, and the fact that he had the skills package to do it in a real easy down home way that I don't think anybody ever felt threatened. It's just they identified all our problems and they solved them one after another.
And that's hard to do when you have an established long-term, people have been here forever. We've always done it this way. We've all run into those walls. Obviously there was a motivating event that made people maybe more receptive, but still, it's still hard to get firefighters to change.
You're still fighting cultures, right? You fight the Southern culture, you fight the fire department culture. It's like, I can imagine that despite 9 dead firefighters, that there was still some resistance within the department.
Oh, it was fascinating to do an analysis of what was going on, because as we were doing the investigation, there were 246 firefighters. I guess there were 237 were left. You could divide them just about 50-50. There was one camp that said, oh my God, I knew something bad was going to happen, and it would take something bad to address the problems. And the other half were, what went wrong? Hey, we just had a bad day.
I think it's impressive too that even beyond the fire department, you got cities and governments and municipalities to agree to work together and make all these changes and spend the money and all that. It's more than just a fire department culture. It's the elected officials and admin that have to buy into it, especially when they've been probably hearing for years from the fire department that we're
They're
the
good.
best. Everything we do is good. We're good.
Well, they had an ISO class 1 rating. There's another story of how they got it.
Yeah, I was going to say, how'd that happen? When I read that in the report right away, I went like, what?
Well, as it happened, that the guy who did the ratings lived in Charleston and was best friends with the chief. So everything they did was focused on getting points.
Right.
Not on being effective or anything. So, but they had this image, and they convinced themselves that they were the best fire department in the Southeast United States.
We've never seen that before.
Never heard that before,
No,
Chief.
No.
Unheard of.
No.
Yeah. And the mayor believed it. When we were brought in, the mayor thought that he was bringing us in to prove that everything was okay.
Wow.
And as we went along, it was like, oh, everything's not okay. And
2.5 inch hose and 60-gallon-a-minute nozzles and no command and not refilling SCBAs. I mean, it's just no safety officer, oh my gosh.
Yeah. The very first day that we were there, I got to tell you that I had a great team. And I think did you list off the names of the team members at the beginning?
I didn't. Well, we can.
Yeah. So I don't leave anybody out.
I'm there. Okay. So yourself, Chief, and then just Mike
Chiramonte. Yeah.
Brian Crawford, Peter Peringer, Kevin Roche, which that name sounds familiar to me.
Kevin Roach. Yeah.
Roach.
Yeah.
And Timothy Sendelbach, which is fire engineering or firehouse or something.
He was firehouse for a while. Yeah, he's now the chief in Loveland, Colorado.
Nice.
The common thread is those guys are all friends of Gordon.
Of who?
Of Gordon, me. They were.
Ah.
I was the thread that connected all of those guys. I got to pick an all-star team to do the job. And those are, great guys. Bring a bunch of different visions and skills, but collectively a super team to do the work. The first day we were in town, we set up a meeting with the fire chief and his senior staff just to sit down to talk about how we were going to go about doing it. And we sat in the conference room, and all of us are sitting listening, and basically the fire chief was trying to convince us that they were the greatest fire department in the South, and they really just had a bad day. And I think literally he believed that. A little bit before noon, the pagers went off, and there was a working fire about 6 blocks from where we were. So we all picked up and we went to the fire and watched. And this group of us are standing watching, and we're looking at each other saying, "Oh my God."
Yeah. I mean, I've sold fire trucks for 25 years. The chief always bought the greatest truck.
Yeah.
So I know how it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then you go to a fire and you see it like, wow.
Yeah. And there were great, a lot of really good guys. But as I say, this 50-50 split between the believers and the non-believers. And I say they had, over the next 18 months, they lost half the department.
Yeah. Well, the whole mental thing and changes and oh my gosh. I can only imagine it, right?
Yeah.
Which they've talked about that.
Yeah, they had a great mental support team that was built around it with local psychological support people, and they had a lot of help through NFFF from the New York Fire Department peer counselor team. A bunch of those guys came down and really provided a lot of help. So that was another side benefit.
That's amazing that they came down. And I was just recently, after the 20th anniversary of 9/11, I watched another documentary on the FDNY and the changes they've been through. It's absolutely amazing. Like from mental health, tactical strategies, trucks, like they're like world class, absolutely. So it's great that they came down to help out there.
Yeah, very similar as how much 9/11 impacted FDNY. And if you think on a percentage basis, FDNY lost 343 guys out of about 4. Charleston lost 9 out of 246. The percentages are about the same.
Yeah.
The impact on the department is about the same proportionately, and they both came out of it stronger in the end. They went through a lot, but they're much better. It's just a hard, a hard way to get there.
Yeah, hard way to get there. I know. I just read Chief Pfeiffer's book from New York about and the teach incident command quite a bit through the ICS and how they used IAPs. The first time they ever used an IAP was during the rescue a week later or so when the guys came in and said, "Hey, try this."
Yeah. I mean, that was completely outside the culture of FDNY.
Right.
So
what changes happened? I mean, I think they built a new training center. They merged the dispatches and worked on figuring out run cards, if you will, for calls. And what else?
It's almost like, imagine if you got to write the script for what would a really good fire department be doing. And they did it all. Apparatus, equipment, procedures, policies. It's just, it's just like they said, okay, let's figure out what the best looks like, and let's do it that way. And they're kind of an A1 organization now. And
they changed everything but the name.
Yeah. And I can remember as we were getting close to a conclusion, and I was coming up with stuff. Okay, I'm going to have to tell the mayor things like, you got to staff your companies with at least 4 people on duty. And I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to tell this to the mayor and have a chance of selling it? And I one day I came in and I said, okay, you got to increase this company's staffing. You need all new protective clothing. You need all new breathing apparatus. And I think there was and large diameter hose.
Right. Yeah.
And he just nodded his head and he said, okay.
Wow. I mean, wow. I was recently involved in a paid on call department that had 2 or 3 chief officers that were full time and admin, but trying to get the municipality to agree to a minimum of 3 or 4 staffing on a truck. In the end, they settled on 3, and the excuse was, because they weren't paying very high, and then of course they realized that as soon as they went full time, then they would become IAFF or something equivalent, and they would have to pay a reasonable wage. And right away, that took one guy off the truck, because the city didn't want to pay that kind of money. And so they're today running with 2 full-time and 1 part-time on call doing shifts. And it was justified because, 5 other cities in Alberta run 3 guys on an engine. So, and our neighbors are just like 10 miles down the road. So it's okay. So how do we fight that? And, you got to kill 9 guys to fight that 3 guys on a truck thing. You guys are lucky. Your department is fairly well staffed. But there's all kinds of other, command, the whole command thing.
Yeah.
You can still run this 3 guys. You just can't tell the public that we might not come to get you because we don't have the staffing. That's the trade-off, right? We either sacrifice firefighters or we sacrifice the people we serve, and that's something the politicians got to realize. So they have to justify it. I think, Chief, what do you think?
They don't see it and they don't understand it. We see it and we understand it. To the citizen, a fire truck shows up and firefighters get off. They don't count.
But there's published standards. There's published standards that say what they have to do, and how do we ignore them?
Who has a copy of those standards?
Fire chief, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, the only people who have a copy of those standards are fire departments and IAFF locals, and occasionally somebody else gets one, but
occasionally a lawyer or an insurance company.
Yeah, but then they don't understand the language, so they get all confused by it. So, that really a lot of that stuff is, I hate to say it, it's almost for our own amusement. It's there, but we could try to use it to the best advantage, but it's not magic.
So how much pushback did you have from the chiefs and the administrator, not the chief maybe, but the city administrators about following the standards? If they don't understand it and all that, and it's your job to explain it to them and make them understand, how hard was that to do?
At this point in my life, I've been in the fire service 54 years. I've never had an experience like that one, where once they saw the problem, it was just, tell us what needs to be done and we'll figure out how to get it done. There was no pushback at all.
Which, I mean, you would never see that, right? When you go in and say, hey, we need 2 new stations on the whatever, or we need this or we need that, it's always like, well, do you really?
Yeah.
It's hard to do without having 9 guys dying as your ammunition behind doing it, right?
Look at Calgary. They're screaming. They got all their trucks have 2 people on them. They're stretched out. Their response times are crazy in the far ends of the city. The union is begging for staffing and funding and stuff, and they're not getting the traction.
Yeah.
Imagine, Charleston wasn't even asking, so that's the difference there, I guess.
Well, they were reacting to something overwhelming. And It was interesting. A year or so after the fact, there were people starting to ask questions about, what a lot of, how did it get to be that way? Well, then there was sort of a political campaign to discredit what we had done, which was kind of discouraging.
Yeah, I think I remember reading about that in one of the magazines or something.
Yeah, it was like, well, those guys were from outside and they didn't really know anything and they didn't understand and they were just trying to blow their own horns. After after all the wheels were in motion to do everything we said, there was kind of a political effort to discredit us, but we had already done our thing. So that was,
Chief Carr was able to carry through anyway.
Yeah, in spite of it. It was, that was just a little bit personally discouraging, but we did our job, and the results speak for themselves.
Well, I think that's probably a good time to think about wrapping this up, Chief. But I just want to say thank you and your team for doing your job so diligently, and in spite of, the wall you must have faced that first day, and you just looked at it and went like, oh my gosh. And then how you did your report, the investigation and the analysis, and the phase 1, phase 2, like you guys need to do this right away. And then phase 2, which is, this is what happened. This is why you need to do all these things. I just want to thank you and your team for doing that, because that's amazing.
Well, Well, thank you. It's, in many ways, it's a labor of love. I'm a real zealot for firefighter health and safety. And I think my contribution in many ways is getting a whole bunch of major incidents and firefighter fatalities and getting the information out, because we got to learn the lessons. And
Right.
the lessons, we have to look closely at what happened and document it and analyze it. And, I take a lot of personal pride in doing that and getting it done right. So,
yeah, we can tell just by agreeing to join us on our fledgling podcast here and help us go through this incident. That's been wonderful. We surely appreciate it, and it's all for that cause, right? And
absolutely.
so I want to thank you for that. And maybe we'll have to talk about some other incidents that you've been a part of and how we can share those. Guys,
Yeah.
you have anything else to add, Doug, Dirk?
Well, I just want to echo what you had to say about thanks for coming on here and thanks for all the work you did for them. And you can tell that you're very passionate about it. So it's fun to learn from someone who has such intimate knowledge of the incident too. And you're not dealing with all the hearsay and everything. You're actually the guy that was there and interviewed the people and wrote the report. So we really appreciate you coming on the show here with us too.
Yeah, great privilege and honor to have you here. It was great talking to you. Learned a lot, and fantastic job with that incident and all the other ones you investigated. So fantastic.
And thanks to your chief, I imagine. I mean, obviously, may know about this, so thanks to them, and hopefully that's all cool.
Yeah, for sure. It's a pleasure doing it. I'm just glad to share the information with any willing audience anytime.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening, everybody. It's been a long one, a lot of great information, and hopefully you enjoy it. And tune us in again. Give us a like or a share on whatever you listen on. Thanks for tuning in.
Stay safe.
Yep. See ya.